Hello and welcome back to the screenwriting journey, day 7. Spoiler alert, although you can probably tell looking at the timeline, day 7 must have been a Saturday or a Sunday because I wrote, well, it's at like 45 minutes sped up, and so do the math, and that's like 3 hours. Not all at once, but we'll see what happens. All right, so they're at the racetrack. And oh, that's right. I made some changes here after thinking about it overnight. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if not only did she buy the place out, but she's basically called in, probably a U.S. Marshal, obviously, because it's a U.S. Marshal operation. And she has got a helicopter circling the area, which makes Lexi feel sort of at once not happy, but sort of safe and yet a little bit creeped out because she is having this police protection. So a little bit interesting. I just turned up the volume. I also, friendly tip, chuff chuff. If you look up the sounds a helicopter blades make, that's what I found a couple scripts ago. So there you go. Basically, the scene did not change much after that. Although Lexi has that line, which I don't know if I changed that from before. So now I'm looking at all of that. Oop, there I go. I just deleted a bunch of dialogue. Good for me. So now Lexi's got to put on a brave face, which is why I had her exaggeratedly look at her watch and deliver the line to Gary as they get out. I'm just reading this dialogue as I type it here. Foreshadowing, I'll give you a hint. That's a foreshadowing. Alex, oh man. Should be Lexi. It's crazy how many typos or mistakes I make, and then I find them either a minute later or a day later or a month later, or when I'm doing this commentary. It'll be interesting to see if I come back and fix that. All right, so Gary, having not ridden up with her, is still kind of eager, anxious to find out what's going on, and Lexi is not super keen on telling him. On the one hand, she wants to. On the other hand, she just wants to enjoy their time together. And so Holly kind of overhears this, sees this, and gives them an out, which is, I guess, sort of nice of her. I don't know. So then I thought this racetrack scene would be kind of fun to, what am I trying to say? To get the audience just interested. It's something a little different. It's these, they're not just go-karts that go 25 or 30 miles an hour. When I was in California many years ago, 10 years ago, we went out into the middle of nowhere to a kart track that I assume is something like this. And man, those things went at least 45, 50, 55 miles an hour. It's pretty cool. So that's what I'm kind of trying to replicate here, obviously, for the purpose of having sort of exposition, but just sort of dialogue that takes place in a non-traditional way. And, there's nothing worse than we have to sit your characters down over a meal and discuss, or in a living room and talk about something. So if you ever have the opportunity or can think up, you always have the opportunity. You are God in your script, which sometimes I forget when I'm writing. But if you ever can think of some way to make it more visually interesting and not just sitting around talking, you can get away with stuff that maybe you couldn't otherwise, or it becomes easier because there's something going on. So in this case, Gary is going to try to find out, but Lexi doesn't even want to go there. And fortunately, she is saved by the green flag. And now Gary is stuck at the starting line, literally, not literally, but he sees Holly come up to race, and they basically make a bet. Holly goads him a little bit with that last line, "Run along, I'll catch up." So off he goes. Holly watches. I don't know if the audience is going to pretty much figure that she's going to win at this point or not. So then we have a little series of shots, which is a way I usually do it instead of montage. I mean, it's the same thing. Although when you say a series of shots, the way I usually write it, when they're relatively brief like that, maybe 2 lines, 1 line, literally each one of those I visualize as a shot. And when you read them, I think you can see how each one of those is one shot. So as opposed to a montage where you may just describe what's going on, like, you know, they're going through the winter season and I don't know, something. But this is a little more, I don't know about cinematic, but I think if a director read this, he would go, okay, I see what he wants there. Or not that he would be following my directions, but I think you get what I mean. So this is, and again, a page a minute. So this looks like it's going to last maybe a page, a little less than a page, which is probably about right. It'd be cool to have this sequence. One thing when you do these, it's like, are you really advancing the story? What is happening in your montage or your series of shots or whatever you want to call it to advance your story? When there's no dialogue, how do you reveal character? Well, hopefully you can reveal a little. In this case, just it's mostly from the looks that the actors are giving each other, the characters, whatever. And then obviously what happens, Gary is going to be upset because he, as I say, near the end of page 21, he slides sideways and loses most of his speed. He gets past, and just as Larry thinks he's going to win, Holly passes him in the faster car. So probably no big surprise that she won. Hopefully her character is getting revealed a little bit, you know, tough. Does she have a heart of gold? We're not sure yet. We've seen some indications that she's a little bit unsettled about realizing that she's going to be leaving, but we'll see. In terms of the other characters, I don't know. I would really like to hear input, and I'm sure I will when I start sending this out to be read. I have not sent this to anyone because it's still way too early. Okay, so what's happening now? The aftermath. Gary's kind of upset, but he is a big enough, I guess, not physically, but he's a mature enough guy to not want to ruin his girlfriend's day. And Larry, to somewhat the comic relief, as I find as I'm writing this, and I'm picturing again our sons playing these 2 roles, and I'm picturing a certain person playing the Holly role. Really, I haven't even mentioned this, but this is basically written for a certain actress who I cannot name, and I will not name, and you probably wouldn't guess or won't guess until hopefully this becomes a movie and you see her playing this role. Anyways, Gary or Larry is hoping to get a little kiss literally from Lexi, but that doesn't happen. Now we're looking forward to the axe throwing, but before that can happen, Holly gets a phone call. It's always good when you're, well, I was going to say, whenever you're in trouble, you can always have a phone ring or the door get a knock on or something like that. But obviously, that's a contrived way out. So I wanted to set up the idea that that's the next thing they're going to do, but I didn't really want it to pay off because something is happening here. I'm moving back and forth so fast. She gets a call, obviously, from her boss, Paul. And boom, things have changed. We need to get to the resort now. So now, this is changing things up. It's getting close to the second act because we're on page 23, and my goal is to make this about a 100-page screenplay, which means page 25 should be the break into 2. So let's just see if that happens. And now Lexi, because she sort of feels bad about not telling Gary and maybe not so much him losing the race, she is going to ask Holly for a favor. We don't end hearing the favor because we're going to get paid off in the next scene. That's one of those things. End the scene as soon as you can. And hopefully that's what I did, or at least on this draft through. So we will pick up the next scene with, ironically, maybe Gary not in his car, but we see Larry and Abby riding together. I thought this would be interesting because they're going to wonder, what is this favor? What's going on? And so, as you see, oh my gosh, this is a point where I'm jumping all over the place. Oh, you see that? You probably can't even see it. I'm making a change from the hotel to the resort, but it is a resort, but I found this place on Google called, I think, Eagle Creek. Yeah, Eagle Creek Escape, which is this resort. It's kind of not totally in the middle of nowhere. Look at a map and you can find it, but there's a bunch of cabins, log cabins, and people, it's like not for honeymoons, more like for couples to escape in, not literally escape. How ironic would that be? But so that's what this gets set up here. So again, this is a real place, whether we could film here, but I find that when I find a place that's real and I can look at it on Google Earth or whatever, as I do later on and as I do for here, I can see how it's really set up. So whether this ever gets made or this ever gets shot there, I've got some visual reference for when I'm writing to say, the cabins are 100 feet apart. And of course I can make them any distance apart I wanted, but having a real reference helps. So that's why I changed it instead of just like a resort, a hotel, because I realized that would be kind of boring and not nearly as visually interesting, maybe exciting. You're out in the woods, lots of bad things can happen in the woods. Will they happen here? I don't know. We'll have to see. So I've really skipped ahead because I was talking about that. Hopefully you're paying as much attention to the script as you are to me talking. But the beautiful thing is you can always stop and go back. I could do that, but that wouldn't be nearly as much fun. Okay, there's a little plug for the place. It looks better in person than it does online. Larry and Gary have a little conversation. Holly tells them that they're going to have different accommodations than they thought, and there really is, they named their cabins, and one of them is called Double Dove, which I didn't capitalize the double, and then the other one is Treehouse Loft. So what's going on here? No, we'll see. Come on, you got this. So Gary's trying to, oh, okay, so yeah, duh. They're going to go see the mom because the mom is in Treehouse Loft. And Gary's trying to pump her up a little bit. Abby gets the idea that maybe Gary should go with her. And here we get maybe a second hint that Gary may not be the bravest toaster, the bravest little toaster in the appliance store. Larry, seeing this and being his brother, comes right out and asks him, "Who are you scared for?" Gary, not wanting to answer, gives him the old classic brotherly answer of "shut up." Holly turns back and calls for Lexi, and so boom, here is a major plot point. Spoiler alert. Page 25, break into 2. I'm pretty close. Larry does the noble, gallant thing and offers to go with her. There's a lot of sort of looks going on there. As you see, Holly isn't too excited about this, but tells him don't say anything, figuring they'll go in, the mom will see her daughter and be mostly taken with her, maybe not even notice him. They'll have their conversation and then they'll leave, but Larry is there sort of for moral support. Gary's not too happy, as you can read at the bottom of page 25, or near the bottom, that third to last paragraph. All right, so here we go. This is 26. I'm pretty close there to my structural Blake Snyder break into 2. It hasn't quite broken yet, but it's getting close. And this scene right here, I probably rewrite this I don't know how many times. Please ignore all those Facebook things that pop up. As I said, I may have to go and get rid of those. So what we're setting up here is that Holly is telling Lexi what's going to happen, that the mom's in there, 2 agents are in there, and you can read, obviously, what's going on. This is the goodbye, in fact, and Larry's the first he's heard about it, and Lexi hugs her. Holly kind of hesitant because she's just not a lovey-dovey person. So she is trying to keep it all business. It's hard for her. It's a little hard. It's not super hard. And so she wants to assure her that she'll be fine. As you see, it's really, like I said before, it's super interesting to go back and watch yourself and what your thought process was at the time, and how you sometimes minorly change things and sometimes how you just like completely change things. It's super interesting. And I think this scene may get changed later on, but I don't want to spoil anything. So Holly is basically telling her goodbye. Okay, so there goes Holly to her next assignment. Are we going to follow Holly as she goes to Miami on her new assignment and finds out what it holds? Maybe it's a big crime lord there. Maybe it would be super exciting and she would kick some butt. Is that going to happen? We'll have to see. Okay, Lexi, a little hesitant. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if instead of going into the cabin, we go into the Double Dove cabin where Abby and Gary are. Gary is feeling, I would say, guilty at this point, a little angry at his brother. Not only that he went, but that he may be perceived as the brave one for having gone, whereas Gary perceived as the chicken. So he's having second thoughts. He's looking out the window. He's obviously not going to come out and say, I should have gone, but that doesn't mean that Abby can't. Stating the obvious, that may be a little bit too on the nose. Will I leave that dialogue like that? I don't know. All right, so now I must be thinking, or I'm doing something. Oh, okay, so they're watching Holly leave. And Gary is, actually, he's known her a little longer than that. Well, that's about right. I don't know if this line of dialogue is going to survive. I think when I first wrote this, I was just, sometimes you just have to write and get it out and tell the story and then move on. So otherwise, you'll just sit there and mull over dialogue forever, which sometimes I do, but it is sometimes, in fact, once in a while I'll just literally write, this is a placeholder. But normally I pretty much have an idea if I've got to come back and address something. Of course, I eventually come back and address everything, which I'm sure all of you do too, but there are definitely lines that you write where you know that you're not going to leave that in there because it's like super surface stuff and you just want to say it so you can move on. All right, I've beaten that horse to death. Finding out her tree. Yeah, I had it about her mom being dead, which, see, we never say. I mean, I think my thought process was certainly growing up, Lexi had to have asked what happened to my mom. And I know when I was outlining this, that was a major plot point, that finding out her mom wasn't dead. And I can't really even remember if that's in the dialogue here or what comes out about that, what Holly told her. I guess that's a pretty important thing. So then they're speculating about what's going on there. I think Gary did say something about I should have been in there with her. Abby's wondering if she'll want to stay with her mom. Oh, that's right. This is a conversation where they're both talking, but they're talking about completely different things, which happens, especially in movies, maybe not always in real life. But yeah, it's super interesting when you can have, it's sort of like that whole thing of talking in questions, when you can have two people talking about different things and yet it still kind of makes sense, which is the idea at the end of that scene right before the main entrance. So Holly leaves. She goes to the airfield because she's getting on this little kind of puddle jumper, which is going to take her to Alexandria, Louisiana, not Virginia, because I looked it up and there is one of those J-Pats, I think it's called. It's where the U.S. Marshals fly their planes in and out of. I think it's sort of like a private part of a bigger airport or something. It's like they're kind of a general aviation kind of terminal. All right, so Paul is there asking how it went. Okay. Holly wants to make sure because, again, she's feeling a little guilty and wants to get assurance from Paul that not really that she did the right thing, but that these two people she left Lexi with are good people and everything is going to be fine. And so now here we introduce something interesting. Paul is saying we've never had a joint mission with the Bureau go wrong. I looked this up, and the U.S. Marshals and the FBI do work together on cases, cases or operations or whatever. So this, I think, is the first hint that the FBI is also involved in this. And you're asking yourself, as the audience, why would they get involved in this? Because there's a mob guy involved? Interesting. I don't know. A little bit of intrigue, hopefully. We're moving into Act 2, so according to Save the Cat, this is fun and games and the B story. So as I was outlining this, I mean, the fun and games, in an early draft, it was going to be the B story of the road trip going to where they've already gone. So now I'm realizing as I write this and as I change as I go that the B story or the fun and games is going to be a little different. Usually in a romantic comedy, not necessarily, but the B story is often the love story that takes place, and sometimes it's the A story. In a story like this, it would be the B story, and it doesn't have to be, a love, physical love, falling in love. It could be, but it could also be two people, that are more buddies. I'm sure if you think of some examples, they will come to you. But getting back to the script, let's see what we're doing here in Act 2. We're actually, I don't know if we're technically in Act 2 yet. They're just at the cabin. And it looks like I'm going back and forth. Oh, sorry, yes. We are in Act 2. I'm recording this the next day, and that's why I'm a little bit getting caught up here. So Paul is at the airfield. He has just flown in, checking with Holly to see how things went with the handoff. We can tell that Holly is still, again, not really remorseful, apprehensive, feeling a little bad. Paul is trying to get her to say, okay, life goes on. Get going, get her mind in the right place. And she says, yes, sir, even though their relationship is more uncle and niece, but still she likes to keep it official. I wrote there, his positive mood fades a notch, foreshadowing. There's a lot of people I've noticed in reading scripts, not a lot, but a fair amount, that end scenes on dialogue. I rarely, very rarely do, and the reason is, unless it's like something like let's go, and then even then you would expect to see a line of action, like everybody runs away or they grab their guns or something. But to me, without having some sort of a closure on a scene, it doesn't really feel like you should move on to the next. I do some things, as you'll see, like on his look or on her look or something like that. All right, so Holly's getting in the plane, and she's literally facing forward, and we're moving. But really, page 30, if this was a 120-page script, which maybe it will be, that would be a natural break. She's sort of leaving the one world behind, moving into the other world. But really that happens when she leaves Lexi at the cabin. So that's kind of what I consider the break into 2. The challenge, one of the challenges with this to some extent, is that this really is Holly's story. It's intended to be. We'll see how it goes, not Lexi's. So, naturally you would think you would stay in the cabin and find out what's going in there. But really, even though it might go somewhat against convention, I'm trying to tell it not necessarily from Holly's point of view, but trying to feature her a little bit more. So what's going on here? Paul is on his phone. He's talking to someone. Maintain the perimeter till I get there. So he must be talking. I say it like I don't know. Who wrote this script? He's talking to his agents or someone at the, well, it must be, because he says, let the FBI go. So as soon as, I think the idea on this was, as soon as Holly gets out, we find out a little bit more about what's going on. And maybe he didn't want to share everything with her because he didn't want her to know exactly not how dire the situation is, but he didn't want to give her any reason to stay. I think that's what it boils down to. So she may have sort of, he may have sort of withheld a few things for her. Now this scene in the plane, I don't know how often I paused the recording, but I was doing some research to find out if you really can use a cell phone from a plane. Because, of course, when you're flying commercial, they tell you can't, and I've never tried. And I don't think you can because you're so far away from the towers. Or is there some other reason? But anyways, I was trying to figure out how, if need be, you could really communicate someone. Could you use your cell phone? So I did some research, and I think I figured out you pretty much have to use the radio or the radio mic or whatever, comms or whatever you would call it. So I introduced the pilot here, the pilot of the plane. I kind of remember as I'm writing this, I wasn't super thrilled about it, but maybe it'll work. So now I'm going in and tweaking a little of this dialogue, and I'm not sure based on what. It'll be interesting to see, because again, this is like 30 days after the fact. So Holly. Oh, all right. So now I changed it. That's right, to make Holly go in with them. The reason for this is I realized that if Holly is the protagonist and Rachel is the antagonist, the mother, and then I realized, wow, they never met. I think of Darth Vader and Luke. They don't see each other a lot, but I figured they have to meet to establish that at some point. So I believe that is what I decided to do. I think the problem, I don't know, I'm still going back and forth on this. I like the idea of Rachel seeing Holly, Holly seeing Rachel, establishing kind of that instant antagonism. But then would Holly really leave before the meeting between Rachel and Lexi are over? That's what I continue to struggle with, I believe, even up until this most recent draft, which may or may not have changed from what you're seeing here. But you see Holly gave Larry instructions. You follow us in, you say nothing. And so Holly is taking the lead. We go in. I thought it'd be interesting when we see Rachel. She doesn't look like she just got out of jail, but she's, very well dressed. She looks nice. Jail, whatever it was over those 14 years prison. I mean, she looks fine now. I thought that would be interesting instead of, the typical looking bedraggled and all that stuff. So I've got Holly and Rachel looking at each other. The other thing I wanted to do was have Lexi naturally, even though curious about meeting Rachel, her mom, still more emotionally attached to Holly. And that's why I rewrote this scene to include her. But Rachel, even though she sees Holly, maybe she is sort of ignoring her. She doesn't really want to acknowledge that she's there. She's focusing on Lexi. And whether it's an act or not, you would imagine it's probably not after all these years. She's just overwhelmed by the sight of her daughter and hugs her and all this stuff. And then immediately sees Larry and assumes that, oh, this must be your boyfriend, which we don't confirm or deny for her. I mean, the audience knows. So hopefully the audience is thinking, this should be interesting. And then Holly talks to the guys, the agents, and let the gentleman know when you're ready to leave. Do you understand the arrangement differently? I have so much to okay, yeah. So I thought it would really tug. I don't know about tug at Rachel's heartstrings, but it would really upset her, I think, to see Lexi go over and say her goodbyes to Holly and hug her. And like he said, thanks for everything. You're in good hands. And then I really like that line of Lexi's, just like I have been since the night we met. I'm not sure if I keep that or not as I go on. It's one of those lines where it's almost too, not perfect, but too convenient, too movie-ish. And I have definitely been accused of writing dialogue that it almost, again, I don't want to say it feels too perfect, but it's too maybe contrived or convenient. So we'll have to see if that line survives. And Holly is surprised at how much she is feeling at this point, which some people would say, well, of course she'll be super emotional. But my thought is, right from the beginning, we saw her and she's the tough lady and all that. And so it's kind of surprising her if not the audience, how sort of attached she has become to Lexi, although after all this time, obviously that would not be surprising. So she leaves on, and then we go over to Gary and Abby. Gary not saying as much, being a quote macho, not really, but a 20-year-old, semi-mature, semi-immature. He's not really expressing that he should have gone with her, that he regrets that he didn't, so he tries to slough everything off. Abby, on the other hand, is kind of shaming him a little bit, and I don't know about that, but as she says, it's not all about you, which again is a line I'm not sure will survive or not. And now this is the situation where they're talking about two different things, and yet they're having a conversation, but they're not really talking to each other, which is something that I think I mentioned that before the first time through, so I guess this is during my early rewrite. So now we're back to this part where Holly and Paul are talking, and you could see that I changed the dialogue based on Holly having gone in to see Rachel briefly. It's having sped this up 5 times, not 5 times, but 500%. It sometimes when I jump back and forth between pages, it's kind of hard to see what's going on, but it is still kind of cool. So again, ends with yes, sir. So now instead of going into the airplane, we're going into... Oh, all right. You would expect we would go back into the tree loft or whatever it's called, cabin, to see what's going on. Instead, we go back to the cabin where Abby and Gary are, and we find out that it's been a while, and I don't know if it was specified how long they thought they would talk, but it's been a while. So these guys are getting a little bit nervous, although Abby is right here saying that she's surprised it's going on so well. So is this setting us up for, oh, they're going to make up and they're going to be best friends? Or is this setting us up for maybe something not so good is going on? Sorry, I'm just reading this. Okay, so, oh, that's right. So Gary has sort of had enough by now, so he figures, I want to see what the heck is going on. And as he is wont to do, for lack of a better word, he is already kind of blaming his brother, supposing that he is sort of behind all this. And Abby is more concerned. Obviously, Abby, liking Larry, doesn't want to see him spoken poorly of, but Abby is more interested in knowing how the meeting has gone and what, as she says, Lexi has decided. And that pretty much ends the scene, I believe. Oh, nope, sorry, there is more. I'm picking up this commentary in another day, so I got to get back in sync. The word scoffs, I never know. We all know what that sound is. You know, the wow, that sound. And scoffs is what I usually use for that. And I've been told that I scoff way too much in real life, so I don't really like to use that. It goes back to the thing of how much do you write for the actors, and how much do you let them base their characters or base their little nonverbal and slightly verbal but not really dialogue things off of their character and off of what they read in the script. So right now, yeah, so I'm realizing that they've got to go back well, they've gone back and something has got to be very wrong, because there's got to be something very wrong in the fun and games section of the script. Another thing you also might notice is I've got a lot of mistakes in there. He yanks the door. And so if you're watching this and you're going, Jack, why are you so sloppy? Hopefully when I go back through it, I normally catch most of that stuff, and maybe I'll even catch it as I go. But and another thing you see, and I don't have any idea if other screenwriters do this, how many times I'll go back and work on the dialogue even the first time through. And I've been told, not personally, but I have heard, listened to others, read, that the first time through, the very least important thing is the dialogue. You just need to get the story told. You kind of need to get the beats that were, if you had some sort of a beat sheet or whatever, you've got to tell the story, get the structure semi-good, and then go back and work on the dialogue. But for better or worse, I have a very hard time writing bad. Well, I shouldn't say that because you may not agree, but in general, I have a bad time purposely writing bad dialogue or just writing something for the sake of writing it and moving on. I almost always... it would be very interesting to know how much of the dialogue that myself or any given writer writes the first time through on a first or an early draft ends up in the screenplay that you end up saying to yourself, that's good enough to show to other people. I would guess, that would be super interesting to know, but I would guess maybe 20%. If you think of something the very first time you write it and you put it down, is that going to survive until you're ready to send it out? That would be super interesting. And if I was totally bored, I could go through here and do exactly that. But that would be a fool's errand, I think. But having said that, there is sometimes when we, not the royal we, because I'm talking about a lot of screenwriters, I would guess you write something down, you go, wow, that's a good line, or that's exactly what that person would say, and you feel like you nailed it. Sometimes you come back and realize you haven't. Other times it stays and it makes you feel, I don't know about proud, but it makes you feel good. Whenever you get that tingly sensation when writing, it could be description, dialogue, anything. Or, I mean, frankly, when you tear up, when you laugh out loud, when you get nervous at their nervousness, to me, those are always good signs. If that never happens, that is a bad sign. And speaking of bad signs, I've come to the end of day 7 as told by the black screen. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you on day 8.